Welcome to the Circle of Grace training program. The Circle of Grace is a Christian safe environment program for children and youth preschool through grade 12. As Christians, we are called to provide faith environments that are free from threat of abuse, neglect, bullying, and harassment. Children and youth should feel secure in these environments to share their concerns when they are feeling unsafe. If you are taking this training, your church or school has entrusted you with the privilege to work with their children and youth. There is a responsibility to know the children's and youth's world and to know how to provide a safe haven for them attached to this privilege. The goal of the training is to provide key information needed to teach the Circle of Grace curriculum effectively and to hopefully impart and enhance your passion for protecting our most treasured gift, our children and youth. I believe it's important to provide you with a brief history of the development of the Circle of Grace program and to stress how critical it is that there are clear policies and prevention education. This education needs to be both for adults and for youth on how to protect, recognize, and act in unsafe situations. The Circle of Grace program was developed in 2004 by the Archdiocese of Omaha. The goal of the committee was not only to have a program that was clinically sound, but one that was rooted in our Christian faith. The committee recognized very early on that the Holy Spirit guided the committee's passion to develop the best program possible to honor our faith and to keep kids safe. As you can see, the committee was comprised of many disciplines: clergy, religious education, school personnel, youth ministers, community members, mental health providers, and many others. Each person, many who are parents, brought to the group their expertise and their passion for protecting children. The program was implemented in the Archdiocese of Omaha for 3 years, and needed changes were made based on the evaluations. The curriculum was also reviewed by a school psychologist, child protection services, law enforcement, and a forensic child interviewer to ensure that preventative components to the program were clinically sound. We currently have Circle of Grace in 13 other dioceses throughout the United States. Their feedback on the program has been excellent. The Protestant version has been successfully piloted and is now available to interested Christian denominations. If you would like to review the testimonies regarding the program, you can go to the listed website on the PowerPoint in front of you. Now I would like you to take just a minute and close your eyes for a moment and think about a child or a youth who you have known or you have suspected was abused or neglected. How did this knowledge make you feel? Were you angry, sad, helpless? Now I'd like you to take just a moment and think about how God would view this same situation. As the first bullet point states, God, our Creator, desires His little ones, His children and youth, to be safe more than we can ever imagine. So it's important that we provide programs that allow Him in the arena to help kids keep safe. Circle of Grace provides our children and youth with how to apply their Christian faith to their lives. How do you feel when someone takes the time to really know you and your world? Most of us would really trust and feel connected to a person who really took the time to get to know us. Kids feel a real connection to their faith communities when these communities care enough to provide safety education, which is relative to the world the kids encounter. Take a look now at the current national statistics. These current national statistics reflect the world that our kids need to navigate daily. These statistics help us realize why it is so important to provide safe environments in our faith communities. It is really sobering to realize that in 2008 there were over 842,000 credible child abuse neglect reports in the United States. One needs to realize that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience some sort of sexual abuse or exploitation by the time they're 18. Up to 90% of the time, the perpetrator is known to the child and youth. So many programs that just deal with stranger danger aren't as effective as ones that deal with known perpetrators. Juveniles commit approximately 1/3 of all sexual offenses against children, and that number continues to rise. 1 in 5 children, the ages 10 to 17, receive unwanted sexual solicitation online through the internet. These statistics reveal that today's children and youth have a much higher risk of being abused by someone they know than by someone who is a stranger. There are many key elements to providing safe environments for our children and youth. Faith communities need to have policies in place regarding child abuse, neglect, and ministerial conduct. These policies are important to establish because they outline expectations and, more importantly, emphasize the valuable gift our children and youth are to the faith community. All adults involved with children and youth need to be educated in these policies and in identification and reporting of child abuse and neglect to the local authorities. Policies are only as good as they are known and implemented. Checking criminal backgrounds is highly advised for all who work with children and youth. Although background checks do not automatically prevent abuse, they do give us a current snapshot of a person's interaction with the community and with the laws. This step reinforces the faith community's intent to do all that is possible to keep kids safe. The last key component is to educate our children and youth on healthy boundaries by teaching the Circle of Grace curriculum. We must always remember our commitment to our children and youth. All children and youth should experience a welcoming, secure, warm, and protected environment, allowing them to embrace all aspects of their Christian faith and engage in healthy relationships. The fact that you're participating in this DVD training reveals the importance you and your faith community has already placed on keeping kids safe. So you're probably asking yourself, when is she going to tell me about exactly what Circle of Grace is? Well, this section we will be looking at this question along with the program's concepts, philosophies, objectives, all of which are rooted in our Christian faith. The Circle of Grace is the love and goodness that surrounds us and all others. The recognition that God is always with us and is there for us in difficult situations. Our faith's promise is not that everything will always be perfect, but that God is always with us, especially in our struggles. The Circle of Grace holds the very essence of who you are in mind, heart, soul, body, and sexuality, encompassing all your senses. I'd like to take a moment now and have a visual way for you to see how this concept works. I'd like you to take a moment, and I would like you to close your eyes and imagine the following. Imagine raising your hands above your head, then bringing your arms slowly down, keeping them outstretched. Then you extend your arms in front of you and then behind you, knowing, truly knowing, that God is in this space with you. Then slowly you reach down to your feet. This is your circle of grace. You are in it. As you can see, the Circle of Grace meditation gives a very visual way for children to understand the concept that God is always present in their lives. This concept is quite simple, and I believe it's very profound. It encompasses all of who you are, including your senses, no matter what your age, status, or ethnicity is. It is a universal concept that helps us visualize a clear boundary between us and the world. This visual boundary, which includes all our senses, is key because our senses are the way in which we interact with the world. The presence of God in this space invites each of us to examine what belongs in or out of each of our circle of grace. The circle of grace is relational. God is in our circle of grace because He desires relationship with us. God is not in this space because He's nosy. He has chosen to be present with us because He desires this relationship. This is why the Circle of Grace is taught in the context of relationship. The program stresses the value of the lessons to be taught by a trusted adult and is not in a DVD form for the kids to watch. What we know is that moral development and discernment matures with face-to-face relationships, not with technological relationships. So if you can just imagine, moral development really talks about and is developed with real relationships. If I were to slap someone, I would get an immediate response. I would either have them cry, yell and scream at me, knock me down, but there would be some sort of consequence would help me decide, gee, this might not be the best thing to do or the best action to take. This is how moral development starts to happen with our children. Now, if I say something very cruel over the internet, I don't get that same kind of immediate reaction consequence. And so sometimes it makes it harder for kids to help decide what is something that is moral or not moral based on technological interaction. God's desire to keep kids safe is core to the Circle of Grace concept. I'm sure each of you have had a time where your gut was telling you to do one thing, but you did not act on it, and later you regretted for not listening. As adults, many times we ignore this internal prompting, and we do not connect it with God wanting us to be all that we can be. The Circle of Grace program teaches our children and youth that uncomfortable feeling is not just a gut reaction, but is a prompting from the Holy Spirit to listen and seek help from a trusted adult. The key to teaching Circle of Grace is truly believing, as the prayer and the meditation expresses, that God is that close to us and is all around us. We really need to ask ourselves, do we allow ourselves this reality? When the program first came out, we did some trainings with our catechist Sunday school teachers, and after the training, a OR nurse came up to talk to me and told me that she was a nurse in the operating room. And I said, that's great, and obviously it's wonderful to have her teach in our parishes. Her later comment was, do you mean Jesus is present right there in the OR? And of course I said yes. This concept even helps adults to get out of their head and get into their heart of the reality that Jesus is present always. Unlike secular programs, it is an invitation for adults to re-examine their own spirituality. Most secular programs tell kids what they should and should not do as minors. Don't go with strangers, don't drink, don't view pornography, but as adults, we can justify these behaviors because we are competent adults. It is really hard to teach the Circle of Grace without reflecting on your own Circle of Grace and what might you be letting in that is not good for you, and what might you be letting in that is good for you. And really to contemplate what would the world look like if our actions really truly reflected this belief. Christianity teaches that God has created each of us unique and special. Genesis 1:27 tells us that we are created male and female in God's image, and that God saw that as very good. In that goodness, we are meant to respect ourselves and everyone else as persons created and loved by God. As you can see, these concepts talk about the sacredness of each person. The committee believed that the philosophy should be clear and sound enough to apply to all grades, with activities being age appropriate. So really, why is it important to help our young people understand their Circle of Grace? It's really important because God intends our relationships in life to be experiences of divine love. Think about a relationship where you felt unconditionally loved. These are the type of relationships where we encounter God in the most intimate and divine way. Respectful, nurturing, loving relationships increases our understanding of our own value and helps us to love others. It is never too early to help young people understand how very special they are and how relationships in life are called to be sacred. Children and youth have a higher chance of discussing their concerns when they have solid and healthy relationships surrounding them. Understanding that this can help them protect the very special person they are and to be respectful for others. Many parents have a hard time talking about sexuality in general. Although the Circle of Grace is not a sex education program, it does give the language and the foundation to start this conversation with their children and youth. What does popular culture want our young children to believe? It wants our young children to believe that relationships are more about taking and less about giving. That relationships can be attained by consuming the latest product, clothing, music, and looks. Earlier, we talked about the world that our children and youth need to navigate. Most of the time, popular culture gives them negative messages on relationships and their worth as human beings. We can find many examples of this by watching TV or listening to current music. Popular culture would like the youth to believe that somehow their body is separate from who they are, a disconnect. Popular culture wants our kids to buy into the deception that a casual, intimate relationship, such as friends with benefits or hooking up, does not harm or negatively affect them. But as Christians, we realize that these type of encounters affects their souls, and it is our hope, all of our hope, that somehow we can find unconditional love and acceptance. Many of the Circle of Grace lessons will help children and youth discern these cultural messages. It is critical that we develop a Circle of Grace culture modeling for the children and youth our belief that God is always present and wanting to help. We need to contemplate all the things that enter into our own Circle of Grace through our senses. Do these things honor who we are as children of God? How does the Circle of Grace concept protect kids? The Circle of Grace gives children and youth an opportunity to tell us about whatever makes them feel uncomfortable. The Circle of Grace concept helps protect children and youth because it gives them and adults a framework and a language to address safety concerns. It gives the children and youth an opportunity to tell us about whatever makes them uncomfortable, which many times is before inappropriate touch has occurred. An offender is alerted when a child or youth states, "You are in my Circle of Grace." This is a clue that the child or youth has had safety education and may deter further contacts. We've had many examples of how children and youth use this concept to communicate their concerns to the trusted adults in their lives. One example was we had a substitute teacher who, after the Circle of Grace curriculum was taught to the students, 14 students came forward to the principal and to the teacher to state that this substitute teacher made them feel uncomfortable. He would rub their shoulders and touch them away on their shoulders and their waist that made them feel very uncomfortable. Alone, this may not seem like enough to report, but his access to the children and their report that he had made them feel uncomfortable was enough for us to report to the authorities. The children were interviewed, and the sergeant of the law enforcement agency indicated that it was appropriate to refer, and in fact, this substitute teacher was grooming those students. Youth leaders would report after Circle of Grace was taught that the youth were disclosing thoughts of depression, cutting, suicide, and self-harm after they were taught the lesson. So I think you can see that children and youth really do understand the concept and are able to use this language and this framework that we've given them to help us keep them safe. So what about offenders? You really can't identify an offender based on race, sex, age, or their relationship to the child. We can identify some behaviors they exhibit that are for the sole purpose of putting the child or youth in a vulnerable position to be abused. Offenders usually start to groom children and youth by chipping away at safeguards put in place by trusted adults. Offenders encourage children and youth to lie to their parents. They insist that the children and youth break family rules, such as allowing anyone to be home when they're home alone. They entice the children and youth to drink alcohol or view pornography. They put pressure on the child or youth to keep the relationship or aspects of the relationship secret. These behaviors are to lower the defenses of the children and youth and chip away at the safeguards put in place by the adults in their lives. The Circle of Grace concept gives the children and youth the language and framework to report these kind of behaviors to the trusted adults in their lives before an abusive situation occurs. A good example of how this might be helpful was in my earlier years as a social worker, I provided a support group for adults molested as children. And during this support group, there was an adult woman who indicated she was abused by her grandpa at age 8. She really believed that she had told her mom as a child, and her mom did not believe her. The group kindly urged her to tell us exactly what she remembered about telling her mom. And this is what she said. She said she was about 8. Her mom was in the kitchen, and they were about ready to go to her grandpa's house. She went over to her mom. She tugged at her blouse and said, "Mom, I don't want to go to Grandpa's. He's mean." And her mom said, as you probably can imagine, "He's your grandpa and you're going." If you look at the situation, even as an adult, this woman believed that she told her mom about the abuse and her mom did nothing. You want to have to ask yourself, did this mother really know that her child was being abused? I don't think so. Now, if we take the same situation and play it out in today's environment, if a child or youth comes to the mother and says, "I don't want to go to Grandpa's house, he's bothering me, I feel uncomfortable in my circle of grace," that is really an indication for the adult to ask more questions. Now, it might be something as simple as he doesn't allow them to have cell phones or do the internet or games, online games, but it might be something more serious. So that is what we're talking about. It gives the language and framework for adults to be able to help kids feel safe. Parents want to believe that they can protect their children and youth from all harm and that their child will come to them when they are uncomfortable or concerned. It is important to recognize that many times kids, even from loving and nurturing homes, do not tell their parents for lots of reasons. Some of the key ones are they believe it's their fault and that they will get in trouble. They believe their parents would be disappointed. The offender may say that they would hurt their family or them. These reasons have much more to do with the offender statements and behaviors and the developmental stages of the child and youth, and less to do how close the child is with their parent. Giving other options of additional trusted adults to go to can truly build a bigger net of support to help keep our children and youth safe. So what do we need to do? We really need to walk the talk. We need to model being a trusted adult. The trusted adult always holds a responsibility to providing a safe, protective environment and to help our young people understand and respect their own dignity and that of others. A great example of how you can really walk the talk was a friend of mine had her son in Circle of Grace at one of our religious ed programs, and he was getting the 3rd grade lesson. And she called me one night to tell me what happened with Mikey. She's a hospice nurse, and she indicated that she was coming home from a bad hospice situation, and she decided she wanted to stop and get popcorn and a movie, and she was going to watch a movie with Mikey. Now, Mikey is her youngest, and quote unquote, she said, I really needed my Mikey fix. I'm just going to cuddle with Mikey, watch his favorite movie, and kind of my cares will go away. She got home. Her older son was upstairs studying. Michael was building something, building a fortress, and was very industrious and very intent on completing this project. Now you have to understand, Mikey's dad is an architect, so you can just imagine the kind of materials around. So she went over and she tried to lure him away from his project. She would say, Mikey, look what I got. I got popcorn, I got your favorite movie. Come with me, I want to watch this movie with you. And Mikey would say, Mom, leave me alone. Well, she didn't. She continued to do that. She said several times, trying to persuade him to come and sit on the couch and watch the movie with her. After the third time, Mikey put his hand on his hip and said, "Mom, you are invading my circle of grace." Well, her response was priceless. First, she said, "I can't believe you listened." Second response was, "You are absolutely right, and I am so sorry." For at that moment, she really recognized that it was about her need, not Mikey's. And by her respecting that he didn't have to meet that need of hers, she has now allowed him to be able to say no to other adults. And she really did model a very, very appropriate trusted adult. So what is the goal of the Circle of Grace program? The goal of the Circle of Grace program is to educate and empower children and youth, like we had said before, to actively participate in the safe environment for themselves and others. And again, it's always important to recognize the adults hold the responsibility to keep the kids safe. The Circle of Grace does really provide the children and youth language and tools to help them. There are 5 different objectives for the Circle of Grace program. As you see on the slide, there are the more formal objective and then what I like to call the kid objective. And the Circle of Grace objectives, the first one is the children and youth will understand that they are created by God and live in the love of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God is present in everyone's circle of grace. Children and youth will be able to describe the circle of grace which God gives each of us. God is present because he desires relationship with us. The difference between the Circle of Grace curriculum and secular programs is that the Circle of Grace teaches that each person is sacred, along with boundary violations, education, and an action plan. You can see these first 2 objectives that we just spoke of teach that each person is sacred. The last 3 objectives of the Circle of Grace program are that children and young people will be able to identify and maintain appropriate physical, emotional, spiritual, and sexual boundaries. God helps us know what belongs in our Circle of Grace. Children and young people will be able to identify all types of boundary violation. God helps us know what does not belong in our Circle of Grace. And children and youth will be able to demonstrate how to take action if boundaries are threatened or violated. God helps us know when to ask for help from a trusted adult. These last 3 teach about boundaries and what to do if you feel uncomfortable. Now that we've reviewed the history of the program along with an overview of its concepts and objectives, it's really important to take a look at the curriculum. The Circle of Grace program has self-contained material for every grade. It includes philosophy and goals, which teachers and catechists are highly encouraged to review and contemplate. There are leader guidelines. There's full vocabulary for the program. We felt it was essential that every grade would have the full vocabulary so that a teacher may know what the kids are being taught the year before and what the kids will be taught the year after. There are pre and post tests for identified grades. The lessons are very easy to follow. There's an evaluation on each lesson. And behind each grade, there's copies of the prayers and handouts and parent take-home sheets. And the curriculum is also available in Spanish. All Circle of Grace lessons are structured the same way and are very easy to follow. All the added props to the lesson activities are simple and easy to make. So let's take a look at the curriculum framework. The committee decided to have comprehensive grades and focus grades. So the comprehensive grades are kindergarten first, second and third, 6th and 9th. And as you can see, 3rd, 6th, and 9th have the pre and post test. Why did we decide to have comprehensive lessons in these grades? Well, kindergarten through 3rd grade, the children really are younger and more vulnerable, and they really benefit from repetition. We had this reviewed by a child psychologist and a school psychologist who indicated that was the best approach to teach this information. 6th and 9th grade are transitional years, and research shows many times there is an increase in bullying. I think it's important now to look at a sample activity from the comprehensive grade. This activity is introduced after the children are taught the Circle of Grace movement in grade 2. The activity is called the Circle of Grace cards. You have the children sit in groups of 3 or 4. You give them a set of cards and a copy of the Circle of Grace logo. Now the cards are in back of the lesson, and they are a multitude of things. There's flowers, there's a gun, there's a ball, and they're very homegrown. If you would like to do the same concepts, but maybe dress them up a little bit and find those items in magazines and laminate, you can surely do that. The kids take turns drawing a card from the top of the pile and deciding if that's something they welcome in their Circle of Grace or something they like to keep outside of their Circle of Grace. If the card shows something loving and kind, they should put it in the Circle of Grace logo. If it shows something scary, mean, or unhealthy, they should put it outside the Circle of Grace logo. If the child is unsure, the child should put the card outside the pile until he has time to ask for help from the leader. This is really a very visual way to help them recognize what goes in and out of their Circle of Grace. A way to demonstrate that children really do get this, one of the evaluations we got back from one of our schools was a boy, and I will name him John, was doing this activity and picked a card of a family having a picnic. This particular teacher had made the cards out of magazines and had them laminated. And as you can imagine, this card had the checkerboard tablecloth, the fried chicken, the sunshine, the family was outdoors. And this little boy took this card and threw it across the room. The teacher, very concerned, said, "John, why did you do that?" John's reply to the teacher was, "I don't know these people. They don't belong to my Circle of Grace." Now, we can laugh about this, but it tells us kids, number one, are very concrete, and he really does understand the concept of what belongs in and out of our Circle of Grace. The focus grades have one lesson for a particular area. So 4th grade is the internet, the 5th grade has influence of media, the 7th grade is about respect and bullying, the 8th grade is about morality and popular culture, 10th grade is about boundaries, 11th grade is about emotional grooming, and 12th grade is about real love versus counterfeit love. The focus lessons also review the key concepts of Circle of Grace and have an action plan. Now we're going to look at a sample activity for Focus Grade 8. This activity helps the kids compare their Christian faith values versus popular culture tells us is important. Here's a 10 Commandment worksheet that helps them do this task. One example would be that our faith tells us to put God first and only worship Him. Popular culture many times tells us that we are most important. So what you do for this activity is the kids hand out the worksheet, they complete it, and there's discussion about the comparison of the two. If you look at some of the sample segments from this worksheet, here's the first commandment: I am the Lord your God. You shall not put strange gods before me. Put God first, worship only Him. Well, what does popular culture say about this commandment? Children and youth can come up with lots of examples. A simple example would be the Nike commercial, just do it. This implies that they are in total charge of their lives. Now we look at bullet 2. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Use God's name with respect. What does popular culture tell us about this commandment? An example is that of texting OMG. Many people, including adults, say this without even thinking they're using God's name in vain. And the activity sheet, and you'll be able to see it when you have the lesson, has what our Christian faith teaches us that is valuable and what popular culture teaches is valuable side by side. What we found is the children and youth, when they see these two elements side by side, what we value as Christians and what popular culture values, it's almost an aha moment. They're realizing that many of the things that are taught by popular culture is not consistent with our Christian faith. So now I think it's important to look at some of the implementation tips. It's important to realize that you have to believe what you're teaching, or you will not be effective with the kids and the youth. You know, kids know when we're genuine. So it's really important to have whoever teaches this program go over the philosophy and think about, is this something that I really believe? Because the kids will pick up if you teach it, but you're not sincerely believing the concept. It's important to teach the lessons once you've had a chance to know the children and youth. The comprehensive grades need to have the last two lessons taught close together. This is because the boundaries and action plans are the last two lessons, and we want to make sure kids know what to do if there's a boundary violation. And the curriculum has the ability to be able to combine classes and assess what grade fits the group. So if you have maybe 2 4th graders, 1 5th grader, and 2 6th graders, you are able to look at the lessons for all those grades and decide what would fit that group of kids the best. I can't stress enough how critical it is that one reviews and contemplates the program's philosophy and concepts before teaching the lessons. If you do not believe that God is truly present in your own circle of grace, then the children and youth will not believe it either. They know, again, as I said before, when adults are genuine or not. It's important that parents' letters be sent out before teaching the curriculum. The action card, which is located in the administration section, is really helpful for leaders to know what to do should a situation occur. It's always important to be aware that the content may trigger past issues with some leaders. Remember, go back to the statistics. You may have somebody in your congregation that's teaching that has had this in their past. Sometimes it's very healing for somebody to be able to teach a safety program, and sometimes it's very difficult. So be sensitive to that. And always, if appropriate, refer that person to some supportive counseling so that they can get further healing if, in fact, they have something from their past. It's always helpful for churches and schools to be aware of the general concept. This is really important because faith communities need to know what it means if a child or youth comes to them as a trusted adult. The final implementation tips really are that teachers and leaders be aware of how to handle a child's disclosure. They need to be aware of child abuse neglect laws in your particular state, and that the administrator or director really needs to review that section of the curriculum before implementation. Circle of Grace has many ways in which it engages parents in the curriculum. It provides a parent introductory letter, take-home lessons for most grades, parent information on how to talk to your child about sexuality, and additional parent information on safety and child abuse neglect. But most importantly, it provides, again, the safety language and framework to help keep our kids safe. It is crucial that parents and guardians are aware of this supportive program. Lastly, it's important to know the additional resources that have been given to your church or your region regarding the Circle of Grace curriculum. There is a sample of a child abuse reporting packet. There is additional parent information, preschool lessons. The logo is available to put on any kind of correspondence. There's a brochure that can be customized with your church's information. And there is access to this PowerPoint training for all who need to have it. And again, the curriculum is now also in Spanish. Please do not hesitate to ask your administrator or director for any questions that you may have. Thank you again for taking this training, and God bless you for your service and commitment to children and youth in your faith community.